up, it's another day. Time to
50 Truths About Millennials and Generation X. Boomers told Gen X to stay quiet and pay the dues. So while we're slaving off working to keep the machine running, Millennials and Gen Z came along and overshadowed us. Let's discuss the 50 truths about Gen X and Millennials. Number 50. Fear of a significant strike really messing up Gen X. This really was no joke. Some Gen Xers grew up in a place that would be considered a top candidate to be a first strike. Imagine if you're in a 6th grade on a rainy day recess, actually trying to figure out if you were in the incineration zone. The inherent fear of us all dying in a nuclear holocaust was constantly reinforced from childhood well into the 20s. If you weren't hearing about it on the news, it was on television shows and in movies and video games. It was a constant threat. Number 49. Parents really didn't care where Gen X were during the day. Some kids were gone all day and well into the night, so around midnight, they called their mom to tell her they were at a friend's house, and she hadn't even realized they weren't home. We see posts online today about how everyone is constantly checking on the locations of their spouse or children, and it seems so weird to us. We can't fathom being teens and snooping or stalking our friends. Gen X was around other kids all day, at school, at home, and the rest of the time was in front of the TV.
Another unusual hobby for women, with even more interest to men, in both senses, is weight training. And at a gymnasium in Earl's Court, London,
adults weren't a part of the daily routine unless it was for discipline or authority. Anything Gen X learned from adults was unplanned. When thinking back, Gen X can vaguely picture the adults in their childhood. They're more like extras in their minds. Number 48. Adults could be really scary and unpredictable. In 1970, dads were abusive drunks and mums were hippies who would smoke cigarettes and pot and drop acid when the kids were around. There was never any sense of putting the kids first, making sure they were safe, or setting any kind of positive example for them. And a lot of these experiences didn't kill us or make us stronger. It just traumatized us. For all the bravado we see about how tough we are as a generation, we think some of us may have had it a bit rougher than others. Number 47. You and your opinion don't matter. Nobody owes you anything. In the words of our 8th grade science teacher and high school track coach, anytime the concept of fairness came up, he said, "Taxes aren't fair, life's not fair, and I'm not fair." Gen X faced a lot of injustices around the world, whether it be racist domestic policies, the perpetuation of poverty, colonialism, the exploit of working people around the world, the genocide of indigenous peoples, food inequality, modern slavery. Our mission, as we saw it, was to show how we were all connected.
In major cities, lived scattered throughout the city. They weren't segregated particularly. It's only with the great migration of 6 to 7 million African Americans north and west
that the choices we make affect our own communities and the global community at large. Gen X openly acknowledged that our ranting about cocoa production and diamond mines and deforestation and water rights and redlining and food deserts was only a mental exercise if it didn't transform into some kind of social action. Number 46. Gen X is the walk it off generation. It's about getting little to no attention whenever we do need it. Hurt your leg? Walk it off. Fall off the climbing bars? Walk it off. Get beat up by a bully? Walk it off. Being bullied was looked at as a rite of passage. Either you fight back or keep your head down and suck it up. Just don't, whatever you do, complain about it and look like a weakling in front of your peers. Keep your mouth shut at home for sure. If you came home bleeding and crying from getting beaten by an older local badass, Dad would drive around the block and drop you off at the guy's house where you got beaten again. His moral to the story was, don't come home and tell me you got whipped. Number 45. No internet, so there was no mouthing off to complete strangers. Unlike Gen Z today, Gen X knew their actions had consequences because there wasn't any internet. There was no mouthing off to complete strangers, not without you possibly getting beat down for it.
Pat Green and Julian, welcome to Database.
Hello, Jane.
Hello, Jane.
Now, Julian, I see you have your computer linked to the telephone line. Can you tell us how you did that?
Yes, well, it's very simple, really.
And there weren't going to be any cops or lawyers to stop it from happening. In fact, if you mouthed off to someone and they decided to beat you down for it, and you came home crying to Mom, she might just say, "Serves you right for mouthing off, doesn't it?" Number 44. Parents and doctors had zero empathy. When you fractured your leg in 3 places sled riding when you were 9 years old, you couldn't contact your parents to let them know since cell phones did not exist, and your parents were on their 45-minute home when you got a phone. When your mom, a nurse, arrived home and saw you lying on the floor writhing in pain and an ice bag on a massive hematoma, she lifted up the bag and exclaimed, "It's broken." She then plopped the bag of ice back on the huge lump and walked away. After she changed clothes, you were put in the back of the station wagon and driven to the hospital at which she worked. When the doctor set your leg, it was done with 0 pain meds. They had you in a full Nelson and another lay across your chest while the doctor set it. You passed out from the pain, woke up, and vomited. Number 43. New stuff like toys, clothes was very rare. We only really got toys and new stuff on birthdays, Christmas, and maybe if we were really sick, Grandma died, or when the inevitable divorce happened. New clothes maybe 3 times a year, summer, winter, new school year. We didn't dare interrupt or bother our parents because we were bored, because they'd find us some dumb chore to do.
These killers if I ever did see any. Fine neighborhood we's moving into.
And it's not hard to understand why it took off.
Only spoiled brats and weird kids would tell their mums to shut up. The world did not revolve around kids, which meant they weren't going to Mum for every small thing like today. Number 42. Quicksand was a legit fear for Gen X. The cartoons and sitcoms of our youth led us to believe quicksand would be a major challenge in our life. Turns out, not so much. People thought it was a dangerous trap that could swallow you up quickly if you stepped into it. Quicksand is a mix of sand, water, and clay that looks solid but becomes like jelly when you step on it. In reality, it's not as dangerous as it seemed in the movies. The idea of quicksand made many people nervous, but it was more of a movie scare than a real-life danger. Scientists explain that while quicksand could trap your legs, it wouldn't pull you under completely. Number 41. Gen X distrust and cynicism is hard-earned and thoroughly justified. Much of what Gen X were told as children were lies, as we watched the ladders get pulled up one by one. Self-reliance was the only answer, and most of us learned it early. And a lot of us ended up raising ourselves anyway.
Potentially dangerous, since the hash oils and waxes used in e-cigs can be much more potent than the other forms of the drug, and the vaping technology effectively masks the drug smell, making detection even more difficult.
So self-reliance wasn't something we chose, but something we had to have in order to survive. We learned to navigate a world without guidance, finding our way through trial and error. This resilience became a defining trait, shaping our identities and influencing how we approached adulthood, careers, and relationships. Number 40. Secondhand smoke. The fact that the 70s had smoking sections in restaurants and on airplanes is so laughable now, but when we were kids, you could not avoid cigarette smoke if you went out in public. Gen X remembers the teacher's lounge at grade school had big clouds of smoke billowing out of it every time the door opened. In high school, we had a smoking area for the students. The real mind-blowing thing is, there were doctors who smoked in their offices.
And left me wondering what was wrong.
And that almost every restaurant, bar, or event center type place just reeked of cigarette smoke. It would be in your clothes even if you didn't smoke. Even at family gatherings, smoking was a common sight. The air was thick with it everywhere. Gen X often wonders how we tolerated it so nonchalantly back then. It's astounding to think about how much things have changed. Nowadays, it's almost unthinkable to have indoor smoking sections. Public health awareness has come a long way since then. Number 39. The 80s were not the rosy time people make it out to be. There's a reason they call us the forgotten era. We were on our own most of the time. We did a lot of stuff kids had no business doing. We did drugs way too young.
This is the number of soldiers in the U.S. military that returned home after serving in World War II. They were eager to start families, hopeful that their children would enjoy a more prosperous America.
And most of us lost friends to ODs and suicides. This idolization of Gen X and Gen Z wanting to emulate it, when in reality, we all behave the way we do and like the stuff we do because we're all a deeply troubled generation with a lot of trauma that we never really processed. Number 38. Gen X were the first generation screwed over by the boomers. Boomers had their own way of doing things, and Gen X experienced it firsthand. Barely 18-year-olds were labeled a slacker by 40-year-old boomers. Boomer bosses paid minimum wage. Well, we had to pretend to be interested while he was telling us about his new fishing boat with dual Mercury outboards and the new truck he was going to buy to pull it.
In one survey, half of new users said they were ready to throw their computers out the window out of sheer frustration.
I have no idea what this disk drive is. No idea.
No wonder the book series Computers for Dummies has sold 18 million copies.
There were articles for everywhere in the 1990s and early 2000s about how on average Gen X would not do as well financially as our parents' generation. We wonder why that is. Number 37. Being alone. Gen X were latchkey kids from the 3rd grade on. An only child with an absent mom and a dad who worked late. Gen X had to fend for themselves until their dad got home late in the evening. Love for their dad was strong, understanding he worked to support them. Without FaceTime or texts to fill the time, homework and cartoons were the main distractions. High school was easier because of sports, but for a grade school kid through junior high, being home alone was a lot different.
It is hard to explain, so Sarah just says it is complicated, which makes Chris angrier. He steps on the spider, calls his mom a liar, and then runs into the woods. Sarah rushes after him.
Since 3rd grade, the school bus would drop kids at home. We had to use the stove to cook for siblings because there was no microwave. We couldn't turn on the TV until we both did our homework, and we couldn't let anyone in or go out. We played board games with the neighbors through the gate, and if anything happened, we had to figure it out. We could only call Mom at work if it was an emergency. Half of our childhood was deciding if we would get in trouble for calling Mom at work. Number 36. Learning computers with no support. We had to figure out computers. There was no way to work with them without being able to troubleshoot and fix things. Every time you added a new program, there was maybe a 50% chance it would work correctly, a 30% chance it would be wonky or would screw up some existing software, and about a 20% chance you'd have to reinstall the operating system.
The Xerox Alto. This machine was so far ahead of its time that it's a wonder that Xerox didn't dominate the personal computer marketplace in the latter part of the decade.
And lose absolutely every program and a bit of customization you had perfected on your system. The reload took several hours, and then you got to mess around with finding and reinstalling drivers. Oh crap, and now the printer won't work. Number 35. 70s parents beat the crap out of us, and it was normalized. If you're Gen X, you can't deny that we all got spanked as normal punishment at times. The unlucky ones got a lot worse. Kids could go to school with obvious belt or switch marks, and no one would say or do anything. No one. Sometimes you missed school because the marks were too bad. Many of your peers got hit on the regular. We would trade stories.
And things are improving at Spurley Hay. In its early years as a comprehensive, there was a lot of truancy, but now the attendance rate nears 90%. Many of the children who stay away do so with their parents' agreement.
Dad would sometimes start the day giving all of us spankings one by one with a belt, just to warn us not to act up. If we did act up, the beatings were severe. Mom would make sure we had done something to deserve it in her eyes. Sometimes eyes roll or a deep calming breath were enough for her to backhand us across the face. Number 34. Financial lies. Paying for school and finding a job and buying a house and scrapping for financial independence in the 80s wasn't the cakewalk younger folks seemed to think it was. The relative handful of folks who reach financial autonomy by inheriting it or having it handed to them on a platter in some way, they got a lot of press, but they are a small percentage. Most of us worked our butts off for 30+ years straight and sacrificed a lot of life along the way to do it. Gen X started working full-time at 13 years old for $1.50 an hour. That wasn't legal at all, but it happened everywhere. Number 33. Just how inappropriate things could be. Gen X were often left with bartenders when dads wanted to play a poker game. Kids under 4 spent hours at the pub with parents. They would crawl around under people's feet at the bar and collect all the 1 cent and 2 cent coins and walk out with $20 worth of change.
Picnic time! Pickle? Hot dog? Potato chip?
Uh-oh.
What's wrong?
Once you've tried Pringles' newfangled potato chips, dear.
Endless glasses of lemonade and packets of chips. It wasn't normal. Nobody ever questioned why 2 scrappy kids were rolling around the filthy floor. On the plus side, kids got pretty good at playing poker by the time they were 8. Number 32, finding work was extremely difficult. Finding work in the early 90s was tough, and if you had a job, you worked your butt off not to lose it. Walking away from a restaurant job was never an option, and you felt you'd never be able to walk into another one. A lot was happening in the 70s, 80s financially speaking, the Mexican debt crisis of 1982, the near failure of the Continental Illinois National Bank in 1984, the run on state-chartered, privately insured savings and loan institutions in Ohio in 1985, and the stock market crash of 1987, all led to the savings and loan crisis.
Is now outnumbered 2 to 1 by ethnic Chinese on student visas. Yet there's little common ground between the Malaysian and Singaporean Chinese and their Melbourne cousins.
Which ultimately meant people worked for any wage or type of work they were given. Number 31, we all have stories about almost getting kidnapped. Our kids still puzzle over why we were so hyper-vigilant with them when they were growing up. We could never explain it without devolving into a Sahara Connor-esque "because I know it happens" rant. The whole tell an adult thing seems to have come easier to Gen Z than it was for us, but they cannot stand it when we try to give them a full explanation of possible consequences. Number 30, Reagan's policy. We knew a time before Reagan's policy took hold of the economy. Reagan's presidency was the beginning of a new political era, and one that has not really ended probably. The Roosevelt era, which preceded Reagan's, was predicated on the idea that government intervention is necessary to ensure fairness in a free market system.
So maybe older workers should just give up and retire. No, just the opposite, argues Stanford economist John Chauvin, considering that older people are actually much younger than they've ever been.
There was a lot of emphasis on regulation and programs to help the poor and unemployed. These are ideals that are very near and dear to progressives. Reagan turned all of that upside down. On top of that, Reagan advocated openly hostile rhetoric toward the USSR. Number 29, Vietnam vet dads. Vietnam vet dads are fathers who fought in the Vietnam War. They faced many tough experiences during the war, which affected how they treated their children. Some of these dads were very strict because they wanted their kids to be strong and disciplined. They often expected their children to follow rules and work hard. Other Vietnam vet dads struggled with feelings of sadness or anger because of their war memories. This sometimes made them distant or hard to understand. They might have found it difficult to show affection or talk about their feelings. Number 28, mass consumerism. We are the first generation to experience targeted mass consumerism from the womb to adulthood. From Saturday morning cartoons and McDonald's Happy Meals to MTV to online social media, we are the product of OG guinea pigs. Gen X loves nostalgia.
Pleasant holiday.
Businesses might sell toys, music, or fashion from the 80s and 90s because it reminds them of their youth. They also like convenience because many are busy with jobs and families. So businesses offer things like online shopping, fast delivery, and easy-to-use gadgets. Number 27, the fear of windowless white vans. The fear of windowless white vans creeping through your neighborhood was real. These vans looked plain and had no windows, making them seem mysterious and scary. Stories and rumors spread about these vans being used for kidnappings or other bad things. Kids were told to stay away from them and to always be alert. Seeing a white van in the neighborhood would make everyone feel nervous. The fear was so strong that it became a part of the culture, with TV shows and movies sometimes featuring creepy white vans. Number 26, survivors. We grew up from under the threat from all sides. War, bombs, abuse, disinterest, AIDS. Everything was going to kill us. So we either ended up terrified of everything or afraid of nothing. What was the point of being afraid if you were going to die anyway? We had to fend for ourselves, and that made us the generation of survivors. Just look at the lockdowns. The other generations were either crying or going into deep depression over it. They didn't do so well. We're used to having to entertain ourselves. We're used to making do with whatever we could scrape together. It wasn't a huge deal for most of us. We knew we'd be okay because, frankly, we've lived through worse. Now, let's go over the 25 hard truths about millennials. Number 25, higher levels of anxiety. Hard truth for many millennials is navigating the mental health landscape, which can feel like an uphill battle. Despite being open about their struggles, they often face a perfect storm of pressures, from economic uncertainties to the relentless comparisons amplified by social media. Balancing career aspirations with mental well-being isn't just a buzzword, it's a daily tightrope walk. The quest for stability and success meets the reality of anxiety and depression that can feel isolating. While strides are made in destigmatizing mental health, access to affordable care remains a hurdle, leaving many to confront these challenges with courage and resilience, often behind the scenes. Number 24, cutting friends and family out of their lives. Something that the millennials were very hard on was people disagreeing with their views, even if they were close friends or family members. Millennials had to realize that it was okay to disagree with friends and family members without cutting them out of your life. People that disagreed with them were often more valuable than the ones they agreed with, even if they never changed their opinions. But millennials were so quick to cut others out of their lives for something simple, and then even complain when their village was non-existent. They went so far in the direction of individualism that they started viewing any community-building behaviors, like compromise, as toxic or bad because one doesn't owe anybody compromise. Number 23, inflation. Millennials in their 20s and 30s had to face inflation.
The Chang family gather for their evening meal around 6 o'clock. Mrs. Chang cooks the meal if the grandmother hasn't yet prepared it.
Wherein even 6 figures would barely get them an apartment. Many millennials who were college educated and worked 2 jobs could barely afford basic living standards. There were very few people who had kids and stayed in the city because it was just too expensive to give their children a decent life in the city. And when Amazon came to places like Seattle, houses in the city that sold for $40 to $60K a few years earlier were suddenly millions. Still, a lot of younger millennials who weren't able to buy a home before COVID-19 are struggling no matter where they live. Number 22, obsession with looking younger. One hard truth for millennials is their obsession with looking younger than they actually are. Whether it's the Instagram effect or just wanting to stay competitive in the job market, there's this constant push to stay youthful. It may not just be about vanity, but more about confidence and fitting in. From skincare routines to maybe even considering cosmetic procedures, the quest for youth is real, but not always easy. It can be stressful and expensive, and seem like chasing an impossible standard, which most Gen Zers would argue is true. Number 21, being non-committal. A lot of millennials you will meet nowadays will usually be non-committal, giving vague answers and never fully committing to anything you say. If a millennial doesn't want to hang out, go on a date, or are not interested, just tell us. We're tired of "we'll see," "maybe," or our personal favorite, "I'll let you know," which is almost always followed by never letting you know.
Do the customers say why they don't like our offers? I personally feel that this is vital information.
Usually there isn't even an apology or any other lame excuse in the following days. This is also a clear sign that you probably shouldn't hang out or even depend on such a person. Number 20, living through multiple recessions. Millennials have lived through so many once-in-a-lifetime recessions that the market has always felt volatile and like walking on eggshells. For Gen Zers, it is comparable to buying your house before 2019 and after. After these once-in-a-lifetime recessions, prices of houses would double, which is something that no other generation has faced more than the millennials. Even if a millennial can afford the mortgage and offer above asking, they get beat out by developers paying cash. After some years of living on rent, the rent goes up in such an absurd amount that renting doesn't even seem a good option anymore. Number 19, the Victim Olympics. Every millennial was constantly looking for a way to be offended and claim society or the system was the reason for their problems and not themselves. Sure, a millennial may have been dealt an unpleasant hand and they may have had to work harder than others, but life isn't fair. They had to realize that they had 2 choices, resign themselves to their status, or try to improve it. Most millennials did not want to change, really. They wanted to moan about how hard they had it because they secretly realized that it is harder to actually be responsible than be broke. Number 18, non-supportive parents. It would not be an exaggeration to say that
最后2门那个自习你学什么了？每门课都要见面。This is kind of like a tutoring session. You self-study and the teacher is here for help.
The only young millennials nowadays are the ones who have parents supporting them. This used to be common among millennials, wherein millennials had to move out of their parents' house. They sometimes even had to pay for college on their own, which also included paying for an apartment and groceries. Thus, many millennials had to look for roommates to share the rent with. The more the merrier. This led to poor mental well-being among quite a few millennials. Number 17, bad work ethic. Millennials were known for being really lazy and slow in their work. Often Gen Zers describe working with millennials as just waiting around for them to respond to their emails. Gen Zers could finish their work in almost half the time it took the millennials. The problem usually started with one person slacking off and replying late to an email, which would lead to free time for others, and this chain would continue throughout the entire workplace. Another reason for this slow pace of work was stagnant pay. Millennials' problem was that they could not sacrifice 50 hours a week of their lives for stagnant pay. Number 16, purchasing needless Amazon products. Millennials nowadays are very attracted by Amazon and other retailers and technology providers. However, they have to realize that buying a ton of useless products on Amazon will not fix their life and is actually ruining not only their finances, but also the environment. Back in the olden days, millennials often used to engage in retail therapy, which basically meant spending hours in the mall, trying on clothes, looking at pretty things, and buying absolutely nothing.
I'm hungry. Where should we eat? I know. Let's eat at Joe's. Subway. McDonald's. Those suck.
Except a slice of pizza or a smoothie after 3 hours of retail therapy. Nowadays, Amazon has taken the role of malls because it is much more convenient and attractive. Number 15, your peace, your responsibility. Something that goes without saying among most millennials is that nobody is responsible for your peace and happiness but you. Many millennials would remember from an early age that Bruce Lee quote, "Never to blame anyone else for your troubles." And not just that, but no one was coming to save you either. It was always up to millennials to look after their health. It was always up to millennials to follow up with doctors. It was up to millennials to make those appointments. It was up to millennials to control their spending. It was up to them to maintain friendships with the people they liked. It was up to them to find hobbies and make friends. And it was up to them to make changes if they don't like their job or career. Number 14, success required significant sacrifices. Another hard truth about millennials was that success for them required significant sacrifices, consistent hard work, and sometimes letting go of immediate gratification in favor of long-term planning and saving. It often took years of hard work and a good amount of luck to become an overnight success. Millennial millionaires nowadays have a very cushy lifestyle now, but they were slaving away through their 20s and 30s. They worked for every weekend, picked up every phone call, slept on the couch at work.
Is that Eric's old cradle?
Yeah, well, the paint was all chipped off
and took crappy part-time jobs to help supplement their incomes. Number 13, can't eat or drink anything they want anymore. Millennials need to realize that they have one body and it's about time to start taking care of it. One hard truth for most millennials nowadays is that even 1 or 2 alcoholic beverages in a day can make them feel really unpleasant. Even though most millennials in this age would hate exercising, it's imperative for them. Exercise is important not only for their physical health, but also their mental health. Some millennials don't even enjoy drinking anymore because of the depression that sets in thereafter. Number 12, more funerals now than weddings. Millennials are in the age where they are going to start seeing a lot of friends and family pass, aka more funerals than weddings. Some have even been to more funerals than weddings, mostly because they have never been to most weddings, which serves as a reminder to always be there for your friends in their happy moments, not just for their sake, but for your happiness' sake too. To some, this phenomenon is even messing them up and they are now constantly worrying about their own mortality. Number 11, misled about education and college degrees. Many millennials would complain that their parents and guidance counselors all profoundly misled them about being anything they want to be, and that they should just get a college degree no matter what it is in order to be successful. This gave them all unrealistic expectations. This is one of the biggest reasons why millennials graduated with worthless degrees that have almost no job prospects.
Most families now have 2 rooms, a bedroom and a kitchen living room.
Nobody told them that their passions would not be able to pay life bills. They believed that unless one enjoys living in a studio apartment eating ramen noodles 3 times a day, follow your passion will most likely lead one to nowhere. Number 10, toxicity. Millennials would remember their school days filled with backstabbing, gossiping, and bullying. Oftentimes, millennials wouldn't even realize they were being toxic to their friends, and would be the person who in school called everyone toxic and thought everyone was evil and wondered why others did not want to be friends with them, rather than reflecting on their own behavior. This behavior can be seen nowadays too, where millennials are now seen blaming Generation X for the problems they faced in their 20s and 30s. However, we may soon see millennials take the role of Generation X, as they are making the same mistakes made by Generation X. Number 9, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Millennials used to have this idea: just because someone else hurt them, it gave them the right to viciously hurt them back. She cheated on me, I'll cheat on her. He was rude to me, well, I'll be even more rude to him. The truth is, the gratification gained from vengeance is hollow. With this attitude, millennials have failed to make the world a better place. They had the opportunity for growth, for strengthening their resilience, nurturing understanding, or teaching someone else or themselves a valuable lesson. They had the opportunity for reflection to ask themselves, how did I get here? Or,
they're running down the street approximately about 150 or 200 like these youths, all these skinheads,
how did they come to be this way? Did I contribute? And they squandered it for temporary satisfaction, and in turn the other person digs in harder, propelled by their newfound vindication and being hurt themselves. Number 8, not being friends with coworkers. Millennials had this attitude of going to work just for the pay, and that was it. They did not care about making friends and were only there to do their work, collect the money, and go home. This is the kind of thinking they would go through, which honestly feels and sounds miserable. Becoming friends with your coworkers isn't a bad thing, and you shouldn't shame others to becoming friends with their coworkers. Likewise, no one should shame you for becoming friends with your coworkers. The best thing you can do at work is to try to make it as comfortable and entertaining as possible. Number 7, no effort to bring change. While millennials were considered lazy in their workplaces, they also did not make a lot of effort in choosing their candidates in the elections. They needed to realize that if they wanted the system to change, they had to participate in it. That meant researching candidates, voting in every election, and actively campaigning for or against candidates, platforms, and policies. The millennials were mere spectators who did not have much of an impact on the outcome of the game. Only through action can change occur. The boomers only have the power they do because they are consistently participating in the system at every level. If millennials did the same, things would supposedly get better within just 2 or 3 election cycles. Number 6, the vanishing middle class. The middle class in the U.S. has shrunk considerably since the 1970s.
Cars, radios, cordless electric irons, consumer goods of all kinds were coming off the assembly lines,
which had disproportionately affected millennials. They are the first generation in U.S. history where a significant number was born in the middle class and dropped out of it. This is part of the reason for the major disconnect between boomers and their children. That is not to say that all boomers are wealthy and all millennials are struggling and broke. Millennials just have the misfortune of being on the wrong side of 40-plus years of regressive policy changes that have allowed education, healthcare, housing, and childcare, among other things, to spiral out of control. Number 5, success isn't guaranteed. Another thing that went wrong among millennials, without saying, is that just because one tried your best, spent lots of time, and put a lot of effort into something, doesn't mean one will succeed. However, it doesn't mean one shouldn't try too. Many millennials have been working hard, changing the way they approach their work or their mindsets, but sometimes to no avail. And that can really hit them hard. It's pretty demoralizing to know that you can try really hard at something and still fail at it. It's a tough pill to swallow. one has to realize that hard work has to be mixed with situation awareness, real self-criticism, and continuous personal development. There is still no guarantee of success, but if you do these things, you can either be as successful as you can be or at least bail out before you waste too much of your life. Number 4. Drama reality shows. Drama reality shows like Jersey Shore, love shows, and other celebrity shows are something millennials are into a lot, whether they're in waiting rooms or at home having dinner.
And I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for a couple of reasons. Number one, of the thousands of people that I've told that it didn't happen. And number two, I'm embarrassed for the clip itself.
You would see these shows on televisions almost everywhere, and millennials not only just watch them, they're really emotionally invested in these shows. Whenever bachelor couples break up, people, 99% women, would proclaim, "I was rooting for them. She has such a kind heart." These shows not only provided entertainment to millennials, but also heartfelt reactions that reflect millennials' desire for escapism from their difficult lives. Though, Gen Xers also make a lot of fun of millennials for being childish enough to think they know these actors. Number 3. Networking trumps expertise. For millennials, it's often more about who you know than what you know. Despite being skilled and knowledgeable, it's important for a millennial to have social connections and networking prowess. It wasn't always about mastering your craft, but about building relationships with the right people in your workplace. That is how millennials who have succeeded have navigated their way through workplaces. While it may be frustrating for those who excel in their crafts and are left behind, it is a reminder for us to hone our social skills too. Number 2. Lost weekends. Weekends for many millennials aren't the carefree break they used to be. It's not just about relaxing anymore, it's about adulting, keeping the place tidy, doing laundry, and grocery shopping. It's like the millennials are caught in this cycle of tasks that never seem to end, sacrificing their downtime for the sake of maintaining their lives. Finding that balance between responsibilities and actually having time to unwind and do what they love can be a real struggle, leaving little time for personal enjoyment or pursuing hobbies. Number 1. Obsession with social media. Time goes by faster and faster as you age, so even if a millennial is only 30 years old right now, in a certain sense their life is already half gone, since the time from age 31 to 80 will feel it passes as quickly in your perception as the time from age 0 to 30. 0 to 10 are basically a void, and most of the memories you have from then are false, and just you remembering what others told you. If you're arguing that 36 to 80 will go by faster than 10 to 35, then that seems silly. Life goes by quickly no matter what, and will end. Enjoy the ride. These were the 50 hard truths about millennials and Gen X. Comment below if you think we missed something you encountered in your childhood.